This is a presentation called Ethical and Inclusive Data Modeling for Gender Representation in Wikidata, Lessons and Recommendations from the Personal Pronouns Project. Our presenters today will be Alex Jung of University of Toronto Libraries, Crystal Yragui of University of Washington Libraries, and myself, Ariel Rodriguez of the University of Washington Information School. We'd also like to thank and acknowledge Claire Cronk, the maestro of LGBTDB, a Wikibase project and key collaborator, the LD4 Wikidata Affinity Group, and Wikimedia Group discussion participants on gender in Wikidata. So this section will be a brief overview of the issues of gender in Wikidata. Inclusive and accurate gender representation matters for a few reasons. According to the Wiki project LGBT Gender, there are 4 reasons, at least, why work in this area matters. Wikidata has strong influence and reach with internet users. There's current work being done in other Wikimedia projects related to gender issues. Gender is a popular personal detail that is often sought after. And gender properties are already being added at scale, so shaping the conversation on how to model gender in Wikidata can help mitigate or eliminate harm. There were some areas of concern and ethical considerations related to gender in Wikidata that may cause harm to living people that we've identified. As kind of a catch-all field with many possible values, P21 is used for humans, both living and deceased, and for fictional and non-fictional humans. It's also a field used for non-human animals. Sex, gender identity, and gender modality are distinct properties in living humans, and this field conflates these properties with no clear standards for how and when the property should be used. There's also no referential standard or reference needed in general for P21. Of references used, they are often inconsistent, possibly unreliable, and used without consent. Overreaching bots and quick statements add to harm by misgendering people based on name and appearance, inference from their listed pronouns, and other heuristic means. The property may also violate the privacy and consent of living people. And so Crystal will go over some stuff from the Personal Pronouns Project.
Hello, my name is Crystal Yragui, and I am here to talk about the Personal Pronouns Project, which is like a little bit more tightly scoped sort of subset of the gender and Wikidata work that we've been doing. So when we first started working on gender and Wikidata issues, we were pretty overwhelmed by the size and scope of the work that we had set out to do. So we decided to zoom in our scope on one particular area of concern, and we chose personal pronouns because we thought that this area would be relatively simple. It did not end up being as simple as we assumed it would be, but it was fun. And I think that we were correct in our assessment that implementation would be limited in size. The sets of lexeme and Wikidata items for personal pronouns are pretty incomplete and limited currently in Wikidata. And there's only a few thousand existing statements linking our human beings to their personal pronouns currently. So the cleanup is manageable data set. And we have detailed this in the feasibility section of our project documentation, which is linked from this slide. We also narrowed our focus to English language personal pronouns with the hope that we would spark similar work across other language communities in Wikidata in the future. And we focused on English language mostly because of our limitation in expertise. We outlined some areas of concern particular to the personal pronouns of Wikidata, the property P6553. I've linked here to our documentation page for personal pronouns, and there is a subsection called Summary of Concerns that lists the different areas that we were concerned about. One sort of group of concerns that we had was surrounding accuracy. So we see that there's incorrect information being assigned in Wikidata. And there's also like a conflation going on between between personal pronouns and gender. So for example, bots might use someone's personal pronouns to populate P21 sex or gender statements about those people, which is bound to result in misgendering. A person's gender is not connected to their personal pronouns, so we have some work to do, some cleanup work to do. The personal pronouns item that's linked from the personal pronouns property just has gender all over in the also known as. And then if you scroll down, the Wikipedia article, particularly the English Wikipedia article connected to that item, there's a lot of controversy reflected in the talk page for that particular Wikipedia article, and the way that personal pronouns are defined and the way that gender is sort of related to pronouns in that page are problematic. We've also noticed in the community that there's some tension between editors who are primarily concerned about honoring the identities and feelings and privacy of living people, and then other editors who are more focused on just as many statements being populated as possible with a quantity over quality sort of approach. And then there are also a number of editors and communities who are interested in very broadly populating these properties in order to facilitate the automation of like natural language content for languages that rely on grammatical gender. English isn't one of those languages, but those languages do exist. So that has been a point of sort of tension and I guess differing motivations for filling this property. We also have a lack of guidance in our community on when to include personal pronouns versus when not to, what constitutes an acceptable reference. This property, unlike the sex and gender property, does require a reference, but the quality of those references varies widely. And then we also don't have guidance on what to do in specific situations when things get more layers of complexity, such as what to do when a person's personal pronouns change. We found useful guidance on how personal pronouns work. A great resource that we found is through the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee's LGBT Resource Center. They have a guide that's linked to this slide, and it sort of demonstrates that there are a lot of personal pronouns. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's a pretty decent list. Sort of demonstrates how they are used, and individuals can mix and match from these to create pronoun sets that are listed here. So there's some issues with data modeling in Wikidata currently. We've got individual pronouns, so like one single word as lexemes, and then we also have those as Wikidata items. And then we also have pronoun sets as items, which is preferable, but it's inconsistently done. We noted that individual pronouns as values for P6553 don't account for cases where a principal pronoun isn't enough to go on. For instance, these here versus the here. And then how items are related to lexemes is also inconsistent. Claire Cronk was really great for sort of showing us the path for accurately modeling personal pronouns using wiki-based software. Her LGBTDB has excellent examples of pronoun sets and how they ought to be modeled. Got one pictured here. And Alex is going to describe a little bit more about some of the solutions that we found in there.
Thanks, Crystal. My name is Alex. I'll go ahead and summarize some of these proposed changes in response to some of the issues that we're seeing for personal pronouns related data. So to go from the top, we are proposing to disassociate personal pronouns from sex and gender. I mean, we're kind of chipping away at it piece by piece because P20 was a very large property, standing in for very many things. A big part of that is also the fact that the personal pronouns property right now tends to be overly associated with folks who aren't necessarily classifying themselves into the binary gender. Whereas it disproportionately affects the LGBTQ community, pronouns are used by everybody. So I think it's important to have this conversation take place and have the data reflect that personal pronouns are a very normal thing that everybody uses all the time. So in terms of moving to pronoun sets, thank you for the explainer, Crystal. We are looking to some of the best practices already implemented in LGBTDB. Once again, thank you to Claire Cronk. And in order to do this, we're exploring the feasibility of updating personal pronouns, the property that does already exist. That said, if we run into issues, we may need to explore proposing a new property. So these are some of the things that we're trying to figure out right now. We're also actively trying to require consent to add pronoun sets because, again, while pronouns are used by everybody, we also recognize that now is pretty challenging historical time, as has often been for queer folk, where there may be targeting or misuse or badly intentioned use of data. So unless the subject has a Wikipedia page and therefore the person is a public figure according to Wikipedia notability guidelines and the conversations already happened there and their information and pronouns are already public in that way, there will be active consent required for adding this data for anybody because it is a property that can violate privacy. Similar reasons, we would like to ban overreaching bot activity. This ties into conversations that Ariel raised earlier around P21 generally. As well, establishing and stewarding best practice for all pronoun additions. So we might look at a wiki project, some sort of task force along those lines. In terms of how to apply the pronoun sets, then I will leave the links here because they are, again, this is a fairly short overview. The more detailed steps are spelled out already. So the implementation plan has been linked to. The logic model. So we've also tried to make following this decision-making process along a little bit easier. So this comes in the form of a flowchart. So the full flowchart, we're in our second version right now, is here, once again linked. And it's supposed to be a visual step-by-step guide to our proposed best practice. So given limited time, here is a crunch of a couple of key ideas and progress in the next slide. So going from the top, some key ideas, accounting for multiple pronoun sets and variations across pronoun sets. So the multiple pronoun sets part, some folks use more than one pronoun set, and even within those pronoun sets, there might be some mismatched according to sort of how people might usually infer or regularly match pronoun sets. So there might be lots of variation and like plurality in the pronoun sets that we should address. Therefore, the logic for pronoun sets, we are once again following the best practices in LGBTDB. We are handling one pronoun set at a time, and we're evaluating each set according to how the individual uses them and seeing if they're first of all appropriate to add even in the first place to Wikidata, and if they are to be added, how they should be added. Second thing is comprehensively accommodating diverse use cases. So aside from the usual sort of living people, regular human beings examples that often come up, There are lots of fictional personalities that should be accounted for. Folks sometimes who have passed, they might be deceased or they were disappeared, and they have been theorized as to their pronoun use, for example. In these cases, we would need to account for theoretical scenarios and be able to cite the sources that provide that theorization. So all of these sorts of diverse use cases we need to try to account for. Requiring consent for this data has been really important. Once again, we have talked about asking for a Wikipedia page in order to add anybody that's not actively expressing consent themselves. Clear sourcing and accounting for change over time. So these are some of the places where you're seeing some progression in terms of how we've accounted for these based on community feedback. So in addition to requiring clear self-stated sources, we're trying to also refine and clarify applicable sourcing circumstances and information retrieval dates so that we can keep track of things over time and try to keep them accurate and up to date. This is a quick snapshot. Once again, the link is there. As you can see, it's a diagram, yes and no steps to follow according to the logic that's been laid out. And in terms of next steps and how you can help. So for the personal pronouns project, again, we talked about a task force potentially. We're trying to make sure that we can implement these best practices that we have been discussing for a while now. So we'll continue testing use cases. We are also always welcoming feedback. The logic model and flowchart will stay a living document, and we would love to continue discussing any of this if you're keen to help with any of the things that we've proposed so far. As for sex and gender P21 discussions more broadly, there is now an email list that's active, so you can use it to discuss and collaborate with other folks for P21 related work. As well, Ariel and Crystal will be hosting a roundtable discussion very soon, so we hope to see you there. And I think that's pretty much it from us today. Thank you for listening, and we're curious to hear your questions and feedback.